Welcome. Today I will be summarizing, paraphrasing, and sharing for the February 19th Al-Anon readings in Courage to Change and a little time for myself. We'll begin with the Serenity Prayer and 3 mindful breaths. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Take a minute and look this over. The question of the day is, how do I practice compassion for others today, whether or not I know their stories? The passage begins with this person explaining how they were put off by the behavior of some of the members in their meeting, but then they found that once they got to know these people and what they had been through, this person felt love for them. Then they transferred that to people outside of meetings, places where usually this person kind of felt overwhelmed by just the amount of humanity surrounding them. They started to look at these strangers as if they each had their own story, just like the people in Al-Anon. And when this person thought that way, they began to feel more comfortable and more loving towards these complete strangers. Today's reminder talks about how compassion gives us acceptance. And the quote is from Discovering Choices, Recovery and Relationships. In Al-Anon, we find a different way to look at ourselves and others. And Al-Anon helps us with this because we feel supported and understood. So how do I practice compassion for others today, whether or not I know their stories? This page is just, it reminds me of my mom. My mom passed away in 2008. But it reminds me of my mom, and I'm not sure why, but when I was learning how to drive when I was 16, so this was around 1984, it was in the mid-80s, I was learning how to drive, and my mother said to me 2 rules that she lives by. Actually, she said 3 things. She said to always be very, very careful when driving in the sun, because sometimes you can't see, and if I ever hit anybody, it would change my life forever, and I would never feel good about it. That was the first thing. The second thing she said was never drive when I'm angry. She made me promise I would never drive when I'm angry. The third thing, which is the thing that this reading really reminded me of, was she said, no matter how upset you get by someone else, never give anyone the finger when you're driving. Her reasoning was that you never know what people are going through. And she said that was why she would never give anyone the finger. And of course, I took that to be a sign of compassion on her part, because she was just, in my mind, she was saying, don't add on to someone's already misery. But also, as I got older, I start to think that maybe she meant like they could get really angry with you and do something, um, really aggressive. But either way, I I don't give people the finger anyway. I don't, but especially when I'm driving, don't. I'm not aggressive, because I always think of my mom and how, like, I still think to this day, like, that was really compassionate of her to put herself in other people's place and say, just like, you don't know what people are going through. And and that's kind of what this is saying. Like, everyone has a story. I know I have a story. Sometimes I'm on the road and I see all the different cars, and I think, if there's just one person in each car and there are 15 cars on the road with me, that's 15 different individual, intricate, detailed life stories. Like, that's a lot. And then I think of all the people who live in the town that I live in, all the people that live in the state, all the people that live in the country, all the people that live in the world. And, like, that's a lot of stuff, right? That's a lot of feelings, thoughts. That's just a lot. So it's pretty easy for me to feel compassion. Sometimes I feel like I feel so much compassion that sometimes it's hard for me to have any other feelings, because uh, sometimes, like, if I see someone walking in the cold or waiting at a bus stop, I put this whole thing on, like, in my mind, like, oh my gosh, I would hate to be standing out there in the wind waiting at the bus stop, and the person just looks like calm with their hood on, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, are they freezing cold? It's like, I sometimes I overthink. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think I was born sensitive. I definitely feel like things bother me. I only think, I'm what I'm saying but not saying is that I think things sometimes bother me more than they bother other people. Like, I only know that because when I talk to people and I say, "Does that bother you?" They're like, It's like, oh God, I can't stand it. I can't stand it. I just finished reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I probably was given it to read in school, and I don't remember it. I don't know if I actually read it. I have no recollection of it, but I just finished reading it because it's one of the books that's a discussion for this month's uh, book group at my library. And in many ways, it's a funny book. The way that Mark Twain describes the thoughts of Huckleberry Finn and his actions can be humorous. But there is, and if you know the book, that you know that you might be surprised at what I'm going to say, because the part that bothered me the most is that Huckleberry Finn describes people being bored in this town and torturing dogs. And he says that they pour turpentine on the dog. And it's a novel. It's not true. It's a novel. But they pour turpentine on the dog and set it on fire, and then another dog, they tie something on to the tail, and then the dog is just trying to get away from what's on their tail, and they just run themselves till they die, basically. And I said to my partner, I'm done with this book. He was like, why are you done with it? And I said, well, I don't have time for animal torture. And he was like, honestly, you're not going to finish the book because of that. And I said, well, I guess that is kind of silly. I said, I just don't have time for that. I don't have time for that in my life. I don't want to read it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And he said, well, why don't you give it another try? Because, there might not be any more of that in the book. And there's a lot of other, heinous, absolutely heinous, despicable, disgusting behavior in that novel. But it just makes people look like I don't know, just aggressive. I don't know. In any case, that's a little bit of a tangent there, I guess. But it does have a pretty happy ending, which is nice. So I guess I went through all of that to say that I don't need to know people's stories. I feel for them because I know that I have my own story, and if I have my own story, then everybody's got their own story. And I know enough people in my life at this point in my life that I know that everybody goes through stuff. And so compassion is pretty easy for me. And what I have to do is I have to kind of set up boundaries because I can get so overwhelmed with other people's stuff that it's just not doing anybody any good. So that's when I pray and I give it to my higher power. And I know that everybody has their own higher power. And I just try to be gentle and kind and loving in everything that I do. That's my goal, to be kind, gentle, loving. That's compassionate to me. That was very long-winded. I did have a frozen coffee today, and I don't usually consume caffeine, so that could be what's happening here. All right, I'm going to take a minute to look this over. This is about fourth-step inventory, steps 4 and 5, basically. This person is talking about when they first when they were doing their fourth-step inventory. They carried a notebook around with them. They wanted to make sure they did it right. They were still writing as they were just beginning to share their fifth step. And once they did share their fifth step, they began to see patterns and insanity and how fearful they were. Then once they shared their fifth step completely, they felt fragile and tired, but they noticed that things began to change for the better. And today's reminder talks about the nature of my nurture, and that's in quotation marks. Nature of my nurture. Learning about that through the 12 steps. We uncover what we need to because we're worth learning about. and understanding ourselves. And then the quote is from In All Our Affairs. We demonstrate a willingness to change when we work our steps. The first time I did steps 4 and 5 was with my therapist, and then when I was brave enough to ask someone to be my sponsor, I did those steps again with my sponsor. And the best part of step 5 for me, and what I've heard in meetings over and over again, is being so authentic and vulnerable with another human being, and then having that human being accept you and love you and tell you that it's not that big of a deal. Because I went into it thinking that, this could be the end of our relationship, because once I am perfectly straight with this person, they may think that I'm some kind of monster, and that's not what happened at all. And I've never heard of that happening to anybody, because number one, I think that in general, maybe people, I know I do this, is I make things bigger in my head than they really are. And like this person says, taking things personally, that's one of the things that I try really hard not to do now, because I realize that people have stuff going on, and a lot of times their reactions have nothing to do with me. It has to do with how they're feeling, and me taking things personally is just my ego, and there may be absolutely no truth to any of that at all, that having to do with me at all. I think also that taking steps 4 and 5 with my sponsor helped my sponsor to really understand who I am as a person. And now when I talk with her about things, and this was several years ago, she still remembers, and she'll say, this is a pattern, or this, she'll bring things up, and I'm like, how do you know that? It's like, oh, well, because you know everything about me, because I've shared everything about me with you, and sometimes I forget these things, but she doesn't, because she listens with her whole heart and her whole being, and I absolutely love her for that. I think that's all I have to say about this. I guess the one last thing that I would say is learning about ourselves is important, but I find for me it's very important to do it, to learn about myself and be gentle. And I guess that's the biggest thing, gentle and accepting, because as my sponsor is the first person to use this phrase with me, we are all perfectly imperfect, and we are exactly where we need to be. And that just feels so good to hear that, because I can't be anywhere else than I am, so why not just be at peace with it? I'll close out with the serenity prayer and 3 mindful breaths. Here we go. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Sending you love. Take care.